Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to Library 2.017 Makerspaces. This is an exciting event. We waited a long time for it. Heather Moorefield-Lang is here. She is our moderator for the opening keynote panel. We would like to thank San Jose State University School of Information. We're grateful for the support over years and years now and for terrific events. This is our third event this year, third of 3 events. We'd also like to thank Follett, WizIQ, and BadgeList. We are using this advanced version of WizIQ, and it's been doing great. Thanks to them, and thanks to you for putting up with our last-minute changes. I'm going to turn the time over to Linda now to give a little bit of a welcome for the School of Information at San Jose State University, and then she will turn the time over to Heather.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve. And on behalf of the School of Information at San Jose State, I'd like to welcome you all to this Makerspace virtual mini conference. Now, of course, Makerspaces are not new, been around for a long time, but they're a very important part and continue to be an important part of our library world. And the 2017 Horizon Report, the library edition, stressed that 2 trends will continue: the trend of patrons as creators and collaborative learning spaces. And so I very much look forward to catching up on how libraries are using and sharing their spaces and how our patrons are collaborating and creating and interacting in those spaces. And so with that, I'm very happy to pass over to the leader of our keynote panel, Heather Moorefield-Lang. Over to you, Heather. Take us off.
Well, thank you so much. Wonderful to join you here with the Library 2.0 conference. I am going to be more of the moderator for the opening panel and for the opening keynote today. Going to be introducing our panel speakers and asking questions. I'm going to be watching the chat, so please feel free to ask questions. I'm going to be taking down questions, asking questions, and during that time, I'm going to be making sure, if I can answer any of the questions in the chat, I will. I'm familiar with everybody's work because I have presented with quite a few of them. And then if I can answer any questions, I will, or I will gather questions and I'll ask them during the question answer time at the end. And then I'm the closing keynote for the event near the end of our time together from, let's see, I'm trying to get my times correctly, 12 to 3. I think I'm 2:30 to 3 or something like that. I'm the closing keynote for today. And so today you're going to be listening to or seeing presentations from June Abbas, Leanne Baller, Kristen Fontacharo, and Kyungwon Ko. And the 2 folks who are going to be, they're going to introduce themselves, go into much more detail about where they are, their lives, their work, and everything that they are doing. Peggy is correct. It is an incredible lineup of presenters today. I'm very excited, and not only an incredible lineup of presenters in your keynote presentation here to start us off with, but also in our concurrent sessions that are coming up. I was a part of getting to see who was or putting in their proposals, got to see everything come together and get to take part in that. And that was very exciting. I've been studying Makerspaces for about 5 years now, and it was exciting to get to see folks in our field and who is going to be presenting today. So I know I am excited. I hope you are too. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Both Dr. Abbas and Dr. Ko are going to be starting us off, and I am going to be turning it over to them. So thank you so much. And let's get started. As I stand here very quietly. There we go. We're using a new technology, so we're trying stuff out here.
So Dr. Ko and Dr. Abbas, have you turned your microphones and speakers or video back on? Maybe you're not going to use video, but you do need to click the microphone button at the top of your screen. Or put a note in the chat if you're having some kind of trouble. So I wonder if it's possible that they lost, I see your mouse going. So you at the top of your screen, you're looking for the microphone button. You want to click that on. So those of you mentioning the YouTube video, can only troubleshoot one thing at a time. I promise I'll get to it. But let's see if we can get Dr. Ko microphone turned on. So Dr. Ko, if you want to put a note in the chat, wondering we should maybe move on and then come back.
We can see if, oh, they don't hear anything.
We don't hear anything.
There is supposed to be
they
talking, yeah.
A technical issue if they can't hear us and they're not able to turn their microphone on.
Sorry, everybody.
So
We're having off to a rousing start with with a little bit of technical difficulty.
Can we change the order?
We can change the order, and that would be completely fine. Let's see. Leanne, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Leanne, would you be able to go ahead and do your part?
Absolutely.
Great, Leanne. So we are going to start with Leanne, and then we will move to Dr. Ko. And this is Leanne Bowler, and she is going to be starting us off. We're going to change our order because being flexible is very important, and we're going to change our order for today. So take us away, Dr. Bowler.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. On my screen, I just lost my presentation, so I'm going to go back. Okay. And okay. So I just want to start off by saying I don't have access to the video today, so you're just going to hear me. And I'm very, very pleased to present today. So my little piece is on looking at mindful making, and it was a study that looked at makerspaces as places for the development of critical technical practices. And so just to give you a little context, this was a study that explored critical technical practice in public library makerspaces, but also it went into museums and after-school programs, a variety of makerspaces in the Pittsburgh area community. And just to give you a little background on critical technical practice, it's about reflective design and critical computing and about thinking about critically about the technology that you make. And this study was particularly interested in intrapersonal knowledge, which is knowledge of self and related to metacognition, and also interested in the nature of dialectic reasoning and facilitated learning in makerspaces. And basically looking at critical technical practice and critical computing supports the new science education standards from the National Academies of Science, which places the scientific practice of critique at the center of scientific inquiry. And this is really important to STEM learning in makerspaces. So that's sort of the background. And the general question guiding this research study, I'm reporting on a research study that actually happened in real libraries and real museums. The driving question was, how might we help young people think creatively, critically, metacognitively, and with a deep self-awareness and social responsibility vis-a-vis their relationship with the technologies and media that they create and use? And so a possible answer, call it more of a hypothesis, what answer might be through conversation and what I call the humble question prompt. So the humble question prompt, it's a socio-cultural tool, particularly suited to non-structural informal learning environments. Here, I'd like to pause for a second and ask, do you see the whole screen filled with text? Because in my PowerPoint, there was animation where each line showed up. Does everything show up on the screen?
It does,
yes?
But the system strips out animation, unfortunately.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to know what people could see. So what do we know about the humble question prompt? It's a sociocultural tool, particularly suited to non-structured informal learning environments. basically drawing upon the well-known Socratic method, where skillful questioning from a teacher, or in the case of a makerspace, a mentor, can help learners analyze their own thinking processes, help them see connections, build new understanding, and support a general disposition towards mindful and critical technical practices. And the assumption is that, and we do know that, with practice and modeling, learners may ultimately ask these questions of themselves without the direct intervention of an expert. So that's what we're aiming for. The humble question prompt. This is a technique already familiar to librarians through the reference interview. And I'm thinking specifically of a reference interviewing technique outlined by Durbin and Dewdney in 1986 called neutral questioning, which is a specific reference technique meant to support sense making through the reference interview. And then, of course, children's librarians know about dialogic reading, where storytelling. You ask children questions in the midst of telling a story, and they're very strategically placed questions to help support early literacy skills, development of early literacy skills, and also comprehension. And those of you who have had teacher training are probably familiar with reciprocal teaching, which is a technique for reading comprehension. And basically you ask readers to summarize, predict, clarify, and create new questions. And then finally, I'd like to say that this is a practical, portable, low-check and cheap method for supporting and facilitating deep learning in makerspaces. So, okay, so I'm talking about a research project that was called the Mindful Maker Research Project. Phase 1, which I'm not really talking about today, basically generated a set of core questions that makers and mentors should and do ask in makerspaces. We went out into the field, we did a lot of observation and interviewing and focus grouping, and came up with basically 8 core or sort of central questions that might help guide mindful making. And these questions are, I'll read them out loud. What will make me happy? Who is my audience? What resources do I have in need? What will inspire me to give my time and effort to a project? What do I know? Can I let myself make a mistake? How will my creation affect other people? And what kind of maker am I? Now, these are not meant to be rigid questions. They're just sort of inspirational questions, and there's general. If you want to learn more about these questions, go to the Journal of Library and Information Science Research, volume 38, 2016, and that article talks a lot about these particular questions and all the sort of problematics that underlie them. That article is called Mindful Makers, Question Prompts to Help Guide Young People's Critical Technical Practices. What I wanted, oh, and there's a poster, by the way, that you can freely download and print out with these questions. So what I'm actually talking about more today is phase 2 of the Mindful Maker project, where we basically took those question prompts back into the field and explored how they are experienced by library staff and teams to support critical technical practices. So, what did kids and their mentors and makerspaces think about these particular questions, even though the questions did arise out of makerspaces. We just wanted to go back and see further what people thought about them. So some of the results, basically, it seems that paradoxically, to make the questions seem more natural, they required more planning and more intentionality. So it helps to make a plan that makes the questions an organic part of the process. But some of the mentors, or at least one mentor, found that this would fly in the face of a youth-centered approach. And I think overall in this study, we found that there was not a lot of knowledge about the pedagogy of informal social constructivist learning, because there was a really driving assumption that that if you were to act with intentionality and plan things, that it actually overplans. But I would argue that acting with intentionality does not mean you are turning the experience into a standards-based, instrumental, top-down approach. Aiming for interest-driven learning experiences doesn't mean we can't plan for an outcome like critical technical practice. So in the words of some of the Makerspace mentors here, they tell us something about their perspectives on these questions. There was the experience of using the questions was both awkward and transformative. So as one mentor said, sometimes the experience was one of shoehorning a question in where I might not have otherwise, but in the best case scenario though, I would look over the questions and it would prompt me to think about something I hadn't thought of before. So what this is saying is it was sort of an artificial setup, you know, like, here's these 8 questions, go use them. And getting back to our idea that, you know, you have to sort of think ahead, maybe find the right way to insert them into your practice in a makerspace. But at the same time, the library staff has to think about how to ask questions on the fly, these questions or other questions. But, you know, always having at the forefront of your mind, oh, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to guide some practice in this makerspace through question prompts. The questions could guide casual conversations while hanging out with teens at the library. So it wasn't just the sense that, oh, we needed formally structured activities with questions embedded, but also just the sort of conversations, as this mentor says, sitting around the table with a bag of chips and just talking about, like, why do you make things? Why do you want to make things? Will make you happy? Which is actually one of the questions. And as we know, a lot of hanging out goes on in makerspaces, which is really fine. And so I think we should think about the hanging out, the really unstructured piece of makerspaces, as a lovely affordance that supports conversations that are embedded with critical questions about making and technical practices. And this fits with the connected learning model that many of us are familiar with, which is ideal for informal learning in libraries. And if you're not familiar with it, think about, look at Mimi Ito's book, Hanging Out, Messing About, and Geeking Out. And as we all know, there's a lot of hanging out going on in libraries. And so the questions should also happen in casual encounters as well. Overall, the questions made sense to the mentor and teens that tried them out, gave them a test run, but there was some pushback. One mentor said, asking, could you make a mistake, is almost like bringing up the specter of making, you know, some sort of scary specter, making it scary than it might be otherwise. And what's interesting about this statement is that the question about can you make a mistake was actually generated from both kids and mentors. And the kids had saw this question as quite liberating, you know, letting them make a mistake, whereas this mentor in particular thought it might actually shut things down by making things more scary. So what I'm saying here is it's interesting that the adult and teen perspective should always be kept in mind. The mentor didn't like asking, one of the mentors didn't like asking the question, what kind of maker am I? So, I mean, what's the significance of this question anyways? It's because if you have some self-awareness of how you create technology, of your own methods, then it's sort of metacognitive. You know, you take steps to improve yourself, or you understand your own process and you don't get frustrated, that sort of thing. So self-awareness helps. But one mentor thought that it prioritized making over other activities in life and discouraged engagement, making for the fun of it. He said, this is a problem because I don't think all these kids are going to grow up to be makers, and I don't want to give them the idea that one type of work is somehow privileged. What I'm saying here is interesting is that these questions actually generate broader conversations, and also that there's interpretive aspects to them. And finally, the question, how will my creation affect other people, really opened up some interesting discussions really about politics and the justice of technology and makerspaces, and made people think about makerspaces as inclusive places. And I think this is a really powerful question to ask. In one case, a maker said, you know, the conversation that was generated around this question elicited this quote, the make ideology valorizes tech expertise as the pathway to being like a fully realized human being and to improving the world, and it valorizes a very male engineering kind of outlook. So you know, that's an interesting conversation to have. So in summary, to encourage dialogue through questioning, learn how to use question prompts in adaptive ways, as I say, on the fly, learn how to use question prompts in intentional ways that still stay true to teen-centered learning, gain a broader understanding about informal learning and specifically social constructivist learning theories. And basically what we saw was, you know, that it was almost unfair to just sort of parachute in these questions, say, hey, how they work. We saw that what is really needed is a lot of observation and practice. This is needed. And hopefully this can be acquired through MLIS degrees and also through professional development. So what is needed is a professional facilitation model situated in the library makerspace context. And that is the next phase of this study, where I'm working with some colleagues on an NSF grant to investigate a professional facilitation model for librarians working in makerspaces, drawn from a model called Simple Interactions. And you can go and check that model out yourself. It was originally derived in, I believe, a children's museum environment. And now we're going into makerspaces in Pittsburgh. And to wrap up, I want to remind you again that there is a poster available here at www.mindfulmakerquestions.info. And finally, I'd really like to acknowledge the young people and the mentors who participated in this study. Their contributions are invaluable, and I thank them very much. And I also gratefully acknowledge the Elise Research Grant in the support of phase 2 of this study and future iterations. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of this. I met Leanne when I presented with her on Lee's panel, and greatly appreciate you being able to join us today for Library 2.0.
Hey, Heather.
Yes.
I have Dr. Koh and Dr. Abbas. They're going to have to come in by phone through my system. Can we do a short test?
Sure.
Doctors, can you say something?
Hi, do you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Do
you hear us?
I can hear Dr. Koh really well.
Okay, good.
So you'll have to tell us. You'll have to tell us to move the slides forward.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
We're ready for you to start.
Okay, hello everyone. We are sorry about the technical troubles. Do you see the slide of ourselves like presenters right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Kyungwon Koh. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma. It's such a pleasure and honor to present this exciting conference. So a little bit about my experience of making. Currently, I'm the principal investigator of 2 research projects on makerspaces supported by IMLS, the Institute of Museums and Library Services. And I'm studying how young people create information and learn by making in different maker contexts, such as schools, libraries, and museums. And I'm also teaching a graduate class called Makerspaces, Theory and Practices for our master students this semester. And I believe my students are watching this live sessions today, which is a wonderful learning opportunity for future librarians and maker professionals. And then today I'm with Professor Dr. Abbas, June Abbas, my colleague here at OU, and we've been conducting a study focusing on competencies needed by Makerspaces professionals together. And you'll hear from her shortly after my presentations. So next slide, please. We'll be talking about the social roles and community engagement in library makerspaces. And our presentation is largely based on a coming book chapter co-authored by myself, Dr. June Abbas, and Dr. Rebecca Willett from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the chapter will be published in a book called Reconceptualizing Libraries, Perspectives from the Information and Learning Sciences, edited by Drs. Victor Lee and Abby Phillips at the Utah State University. Next slide, please. So the maker movement is increasingly prevalent in contemporary libraries, and nowadays more and more libraries offer a dedicated space for creation or programs to promote making. So next slide. And today we'd like to address 3 key questions. First, what are the social roles of library makerspaces? We believe understanding the social role of library makerspaces is critical, not only to justify what we are doing in a makerspace, but also to have a clear vision of individual library makerspaces. And our second question focuses on community, which is a central concept to both the librarianship and the maker movement. And finally, we'd like to use this opportunity to discuss implications for LIS educators and practitioners. So next slide. A great place to start thinking about the role of library makerspaces is the ALA core values of librarianship. So among the many core values of librarianship, we'll be focusing on knowledge creation, access, learning, and equity and diversity. So grounded in the core values of librarianship, we suggest these concepts are further pronounced in library makerspaces and require a new understanding of the role of libraries in this contemporary knowledge society. Next slide. The first, library makerspaces represent a shifting role of libraries as an institution for knowledge creation. The ALA Center for the Future of Libraries explains libraries traditionally collecting institutions now adapt new functions, providing opportunities to create or co-create content for individuals' own use, for use by the community, or for inclusion in the library collection. So this picture is from one of the professional development sessions in Norman Public Schools, and teachers and school librarians are collaborating to develop inquiry-based making units, which allow students to come up with their own questions, create knowledge, and present their ideas using different making tools and technologies. Next slide, please. One of the ways library makerspaces support knowledge creation is by providing access to a range of resources, programs, experts, and peers. While access has been one of the core values of librarianship, a traditional view of access was limited to providing existing resources, predominantly in print format. And in reconceptualizing libraries as an institution to facilitate creative learning, a library collection is not restricted to books and written materials because people learn from a range of resources through different ways, such as hands-on experiences. Next slide. And envisioning library makerspaces includes not only providing access to existing knowledge and fabrication resources, but also making community expertise and knowledge produced by their members available to the world, what David Linkes called two-way access, or access as two-way conversations between the community members and the world. And according to Linkes, libraries play a role of platforms and publishers of the community as much as consumers of publications. And we believe more work is needed to advance theories and practices on how libraries can document and preserve maker processes and products developed by community members, and how to make community knowledge and expertise available to people outside a specific maker community. And this picture is from the Norman High School Maker Showcase we had last year. And students created a range of projects in their maker class, such as music, programming, makeup, magic, like movie and city design. So at the end of the semester, we invited community members and everyone to showcase student projects, because providing presentation opportunities and sharing their work is a critical part of making. Next slide. And the maker movement assumes people learn by making. And librarians have long supported learning in different ways, whether through cataloging learning resources or offering information literacy instructions, reference services, and spaces for study and meetings. The role of librarians working in a makerspace, however, requires a more carefully designed learning facilitation, because learning in a makerspace is not always explicit, and people often acquire knowledge and skills without recognizing that learning occurs. So professionals must be intentional designing guidance, still letting people learn from trial and errors and iterations. Next slide, please. To facilitate learning, partnerships across the community is critical, and ALA affirms the value of education through partnerships in the community, and makerspaces embedded in libraries inherit this heavy emphasis on engaging communities and building networks. This photo was taken at the National Weather Center in Oklahoma, and a couple years ago, we implemented a meteorology-based makers club at the Irving Middle School Library. And every makerspace and maker programs are different, largely based on the needs and the resources of the community they serve. And the middle school is located in Norman, Oklahoma, where severe weather phenomena such as tornadoes are present, and students feel personally connected to the weather-related issues. In the Makers Club, we actually had a student who lost his home and friends due to the devastating tornadoes in Moore, which is only several miles from OU. So the School Library Makers Club invited students to learn about weather and create projects addressing the weather-related issues in the community. And the local area is also the home of internationally acclaimed weather facilities and meteorologists. So collaborative partnerships among university researchers, school librarians, science teachers, and Oklahoma Mesonet really enhance students' learning experiences. Next slide. Next, equity is one of the core values of librarianship, and library makerspace hold their promise for equity and diversity. Next slide, please. Ensuring equity and diversity in a makerspace is not limited to equal access to certain tools and programs. And the initial maker movement that emerged from independent organizations actually was criticized for its white male dominant culture, and the range of maker activities was somewhat narrow, including like electronics, robotics, and vehicles. But as makerspaces spread to non-profit organizations such as libraries, the maker landscape has been expanding, engaging diverse people, including children, women, and families. And we see librarians who do not identify themselves as high-tech or STEM experts, and makerspaces in libraries regularly embrace low-tech and artistic projects that result in broadening the maker horizons. Next slide, please. We believe more efforts are needed to place equity at the center of making and support maker learning for all. We also believe maker programs must be accessible to disabled or differently abled individuals of all ages. Next slide. Finally, library makerspaces perform these roles with and through their community. And library makerspaces serve the local communities, engage with wider communities, include communities of interest, foster a sense of a community, and also develop a new communities of practice. Next slide. And in these varying uses, community sometimes refers to the geographical area. For example, working with people from the neighborhood surrounding a local library, or developing partnerships with organizations within a larger geographical community. And other times, community refers to a sense of solidarity and a specific group of people with a shared common goal and identity, regardless of geographical locations. So it is a dual role of the library makerspace professionals to reach out to the community, engage and make partnerships. At the same time, to foster a community of practice and a sense of community among the makers and learners. Next slide. So before I hand this over to Dr. Abbas, I'd like to acknowledge IMLS for their generous funding support and the partners who make my research and teaching about makerspaces possible. Many of the ideas and pictures in this presentation arose when I worked with these partners, inspired by their pioneering practices. Now, Dr. Abbas will present what all the ideas mean for educators and practitioners. Next slide, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. All right, thank you, Dr. Ko. Let's turn now to discussion of implications of the main points presented by Dr. Ko about the social roles of library makerspaces, and to provide some suggestions to LAS educators about how to effectively promote community engagement and social roles when teaching future practitioners of makerspaces. Next slide, please. The literature suggests that library makerspaces are fulfilling many traditional social roles, but are also reconceptualizing these roles. As stated earlier, library makerspaces promote knowledge creation, access, learning, and equity and diversity. The literature provides evidence of the importance of these roles, but also how they are shifting. Next slide, please. New knowledge is created and shared with others through the products produced in the maker programs. Makers are no longer just consumers of knowledge, but producers of knowledge. Ideally, library makerspaces need to make the new knowledge produced by community members accessible and available to communities outside of the makerspace. But what are the implications of doing so? Are there legal issues related to ownership of the product or copyright issues when providing access to products produced by makers? These are issues still under consideration within maker communities, and students and practitioners should be aware of these when planning or working in a makerspace. Next slide, please. Equitable access to technology and resources is a vital function of libraries, but within library makerspaces, we need to rethink what access means. Is it simply providing access to the tools of making, or does access also include the facilitated learning experiences and access to the expert mentors in the maker programming? Excuse me a second. Maker programs facilitate student knowledge creation through interest-driven programming and also provide access to resources and experts that participants would not have had access to without the maker program. Next slide, please. Access also speaks to the expanding roles of library makerspaces. The issue, however, is that library makerspaces are all unique, and although they might develop around the perceived needs of their community, mostly they are based on the resources available to them, such as community experts, funding, and skills and interests of library professionals. Without an understanding of the overall goals of the makerspace and the roles it provides to the community, the makerspace is in danger of being just a cool place to go at the library. LAS educators should emphasize that the social roles of libraries are changing, especially within library makerspaces. LAS students need to understand the social roles that libraries and library makerspaces provide, but also how maker programming supports these roles, one of which is to ensure equitable access for a diverse audience. Makerspace programs should be inclusive programs based on the needs of participants and the community, and developed by participants, facilitated by librarians. Mentors with cultural competency provide meaningful learning experiences based on community demographics and cultural understandings. LAS courses should include methods to conduct community needs assessments and develop culturally competent programming. LAS programs should also teach students about socially responsible decision-making. Librarians managing a makerspace should have a clear understanding of the role the makerspace plays in the community and have clear goals in place to ensure the makerspace's sustainability and success. Teaching students how to conduct strategic planning that includes setting specific goals and envisions the makerspace's place within the larger organization and community are essential skills students need to learn. Next slide, please. One of the library's primary societal roles has always been to provide resources to support and facilitate learning. That learning has traditionally taken place in programming such as in story times or craft sessions, information and digital literacy sessions, just to name a few. Learning within the makerspace has expanded the role of learning within libraries, whether it's achieved through long-term facilitated interest-driven sessions or less formal one-off sessions that provide access to expert mentors, maker tools, and technologies. Next slide, please. To fulfill this enhanced role, librarians have reconceptualized how they think about and provide learning, which requires training in facilitating learning. One of the most often mentioned skills managers desired in an information professional working in a makerspace, as reported in the 2015 Cohen-Abbas study, was the ability to facilitate informal learning and to develop user-centered programs. Being able to develop interest-driven informal programming and to facilitate these sessions is essential to learning in a makerspace. LAS programs can teach these skills by including theory and practices associated with connected, interest-driven learning in their courses. Another important skill students need to learn is how to select the right making tools to support programming. Many information professionals in our study reported this is something that they knew little about. Providing hands-on experience with making tools, as well as teaching students how to assess their use in making, should be part of LAS making courses. Next slide, please. As mentioned by Dr. Coe earlier, makerspaces may define community in several ways. Or alternatively, the makerspace may have no clear definition of community at all. In fact, competing definitions or understandings of the goals of the library makerspace may exist. For example, the makerspace may have been developed to fulfill the social roles of the library, to promote equitable access for its members by providing a space for community members to engage in making with new technologies, or as a way to learn new skills for job advancement. Or the makerspace may have a less defined purpose, as a place where people with common interests and norms can meet and share knowledge as in a community of practice. Participants of the library makerspace may also have a different idea of what community means to them. Developers of library makerspaces should have a well-defined picture of the demographics, culture, and life stories of the geographic community and the participants in a maker program. This understanding should guide development of the makerspace. Next slide, please. LAS educators should emphasize the importance of community within makerspaces, but also teach students the varying ways that community may be present in a makerspace. Students also need to be made aware that makerspaces may have competing definitions of community, and that each definition can shape the outcomes of the makerspace or making programming. Next slide, please. Lastly, the makerspace should have clear goals in mind for community engagement. Community engagement may include building and maintaining partnerships with organizations in the community that can support the makerspace in various ways, such as providing expert mentors or collaborating and sharing resources. A library may also see the makerspace as a way to engage with new community members who typically do not use the library, or as a means to support participants' activities in their own community of practice. The library may also equate community engagement, as a way to garner support for sustaining or funding a makerspace. Next slide, please. LIS students need to understand the role that community and community members may play in the makerspace. Library makerspaces are supported not just by participants who come to make, but by the community organizations, media and technology experts, and many volunteers. Each have a role to play in the makerspace, which may vary depending on the expertise or the level of commitment of the volunteers. Establishing, managing, and maintaining these partnerships is critical to the success of a makerspace. LES educators should teach skills and strategies for engaging with communities and how to build, manage, and maintain these relationships through thoughtful planning and establishing collaborations with community organizations with similar goals. Being an advocate for the library makerspace is an essential skill that students need to learn. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to further conversation later in the session.
Hello again. Thank you so much, ladies. Greatly appreciate it. And now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Fontecchiaro. Kristen, go ahead and take it away because I want to make sure you have time.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to go back a few slides. I'm with the Making in Michigan Libraries project out of the University of Michigan School of Information, and we'll be posting our slides, both mine and Ben Rearick's at 4:30 will be at this URL. So I want to tell you a little bit about our project. We are, like Dr. Koh's experience, we are sponsored in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Our project is really looking at what the maker movement looks like when it expanded beyond large urban libraries and into smaller and rural libraries. We've spent 2 years doing extensive professional development around the state of Michigan. We run 2 labs where our staff experiments with different formats and different tools and different materials and different projects, one in elementary and one in middle school. We are working on creating a handbook that synthesizes what we know and what we've taught. And in 2018, Ben Rearick, who you'll meet at 4:30, is coordinating a small virtual conference. And I would say if we look at what our contribution to the maker movement is, I would say that we've been very specific about identifying purpose, which helps us identify aspects of success, which I think you've heard also other folks say as well. And we're always mindful of what Dale Grover at MakerWorks here in Ann Arbor says, which is that makerspaces are about tools plus support plus community. So, you know, we think that libraries are doing a lot of good work in a lot of ways. So we're certainly connecting students to technology in ways that we maybe haven't before. And in a lot of communities, that's certainly a significant goal. But I think if we stop for a moment and we think about where are we relative to the goals that we often talk about when we introduce the makerspace concept to others who aren't involved, is to really stop and say, can we afford to wait 9 or 10 years until those 3rd graders have moved into college and career readiness lanes? In other words, is the needle moving fast enough? And are there other questions that we might want to be thinking about as the maker movement, which I think you've seen a lot of photos where we've seen youth participating in activities. Is that the only audience that libraries want to follow along with? Here at the School of Information, we always talk about not what are we doing, but what is the impact of what we're doing. And so I'm really committed to how libraries, primarily in schools and public libraries are the 2 places that I work the most, how we're maximizing that income in communities. Some of you know that Michigan is the Motor City state. We are very much struggling with what it means to build new economic opportunities. How are libraries contributing to those bigger goals? So where might we go next? We might want to start thinking about sort of what are the real problems that library-based making is solving, and how do we know that we're solving problems? Right now, I think we're making a big investment in youth, and we are expecting that over the next 9 or 10 years, that's going to really come to fruition. Is that an okay timeline? Or do we need to be looking at places where we might have more impact today or next year, in addition to those long-term goals? So the real question that I'm interested in, and this really picks up on what June was talking about earlier, is how we grow the maker movement to really maximize that impact on the community. So I want to noodle for a little bit in the few minutes I've got on some things we could think about as libraries of various types that might think about how we're sharpening that impact and we're being more kind of fine-tuned on what we're trying to do. And I really like to see, it's a little hard for me to catch up, but to see how many conversations are going on in the margins. Because what matters to me as a kid who grew up in a maker household that we didn't know to call maker is that there are these skills and these activities and this idea of self-soothing or self-therapy that comes with making. And if I believe that that's important, then I don't want it to be a fad. I want this to be something that's sustainable for the long haul, and that's really where I can point to outcomes. So the first thing that we really could think about is this area of economic growth and entrepreneurship. And one of the things that we often said in the early days of the maker movement is that this was a goal that libraries and makerspaces were going to lean toward. So really thinking, especially in public libraries, what are we doing to help entrepreneurs? My colleague Ben Rearick at 4:30 is going to talk about how might libraries serve as hubs for communities to open Etsy shops or artisan businesses or craft businesses, leveraging the amazing reputation of libraries to give them that community boost to get them started. But additionally, how are we building on existing plans to support small businesses, small business financing, small business paperwork? How are we fulfilling that role? We might also think about, I think you've heard some of this today, about how are we fueling academic achievement? And one of the questions I really notice as I look at blogs is when I see Spheros being used by first graders and Spheros being used by 12th graders, and if it's not a Sphero, it could be an Ozabot, it could be one of a million tools. And I think that we're going to need to think about how do we not just introduce people to tools, but how do we provide increasing levels of sophistication and complexity, or whether we think that's the right job of libraries. I'd like to really see that's our ability to stretch and grow over time. And that may mean we need to take another look at the role of mentors and not putting all of the responsibility on librarians who already have a million things to do. Because when I have a million things to do, I want to pack my car up to go to a makerspace with all stuff kids already know how to do. And that ultimately doesn't lead to great changes in academic achievement. So we're going to have to put our money where our mouth is a little bit moving forward once that fad starts to fade a little bit. I think we also want to think about employment and job skills. And we heard this earlier in the panel as well. Are we really putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to future jobs and job skills? I worked with a library in an aging resort community in the middle of the state. And this is a place where a lot of people have second homes, and the age range of the people with second homes keeps going up and up and up. So one of the real viable jobs in this community is lawnmower services and lawnmower repair. Those are some of the vocational programs. So thinking about, are we making those connections? And that's important when we look at things like this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. When we look at, these are the occupations that we think are going to have the greatest growth between 2014 and 2024. Computers really only show up on one line here. Look at all the other jobs we think we're going to grow. So if we say we're making the workers of the future with Legos and Spheros and make-do screws, but we really are looking at jobs in our communities that might be more likely to be in healthcare or in service industries, that's probably something we're going to need to reconcile at some point in time. There's plenty of rumors. You can find plenty of articles about whether or not the need for more computer programs is manufactured or not. I won't get into those politics, but I think it's important that we look at where job growth is forecasted to go in our community and where things might end up. I know communities in Michigan that once autonomous trucks or autonomous cars become legal, that's going to put a ton of folks out of business. So we're in a really crazy sort of time. And the last piece is this question of living better lives. This is things that we often learned at home, but that maybe in our effort to make every kid ready for college, which was one of our goals in our state for some time, we forgot to teach them how to change the oil, how to wire a light bulb, how to repair their toilet. And so maybe instead of playing with little bits, which are wonderful and do amazing things, we need to supplement that with, how do I make a lamp? How do I hang a ceiling fan? And sort of life hacking sorts of things. I would also say that I think there's a really great place for growth, just building on what June was saying earlier. Oh, there goes my light. Woo, it's a special effect. That this piece of productive lives also deals with a community that, despite connections on social media, research on social media is becoming pretty clear that there is parallel with those connections on social media an increased sense of loneliness. So June's conversation about community and the importance of community and having safe spaces for people to come to, whether that's during the school day or whether that is on the weekend in a public library, where are the places where multiple generations can come together, where families can experience something together, where folks can use the hobbies that they have to make friendships that supersede what they may have gotten from libraries 50 years ago. So with the time we've got today, hang on. I'm getting a delivery. My light isn't on. I'm giving a webinar, and anyway, I need to teach myself how to adjust my sensor. So the question I hope that you'll walk away from is this question of, how do we grow the maker movement to maximize community impact in these and likely in other spaces? And some of you were asking about where you could get the slides, and we'll post mine and Ben's in the next 48 hours. I'll just type this URL into the chat so you can find it as well. So thanks, guys. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I actually had a whole list of questions. I had written some things up, but we also only have 4 minutes. And I also know that there's a host of other rooms that I'm pretty sure that people have already probably opened onto other screens and are probably joining into and jumping into and want to go and join. So I am going to go ahead and wrap us up for the keynote. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being patient with us as we are trying out new technology and trying out new materials and tools and things. And I know I've had a fun time just trying everything out here with this particular tool. Steve, are you with us?
I am still here.
You haven't left me.
For the benefit of those watching the recording after the fact, we really apologize. The room capped early. The cascade failure was that shut down the YouTube channel. So there were many, many people who wanted to watch this live and were not able to, and we apologize. Thanks everybody who's in here for coming. Thanks to you, Heather, and to your great keynote team. It's most appreciated.
And I went ahead and put my email address in there as well. Our other presenters have shared there, if they can chat theirs in there. And our emails are also up on the screens for the website for this particular Library 2.0 conference. We are easy to find on Twitter, on our university websites. Heck, you can just Google it. And so we are easy to be hunted up. And I will see hopefully many of you later for the closing keynote. So thank you so much, and we will talk with you soon.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks June, Kristen, and Kyungwon.
So at this point, do we just log out of this room, Steve?
Yeah, I'm actually going to close the room down, and it will probably log you out.
And I'm going to go ahead and log into the other room, because for the love of Pete.
Perfect. I know.